northbound I-57, traffic still heavy from around Palmer Road to near Flossmoor Road. This is due to a collision which still has the right lane blocked. Just past Flossmoor Road is where there's a tractor trailer in the ditch there. That's keeping that right lane closed. Tri-State southbound, there's roadwork in the right lane from Ogden to 47th. Earlier northbound work cleared. Reagan Tollway in both directions. 59 at the Aurora Toll. There is work westbound. The right lane is closed till 7 tonight. That's traffic. I'm Jim Talamonte on AM 560 The Answer.
Chicago's Morning Answer continues next. Your official Chicagoland weather forecast. In our 1 hour heating and air conditioning weather center, we're seeing fair skies this morning. That could lead to a heavy thunderstorm later this afternoon, high 75. Partly cloudy and 49 overnight. Rain in the afternoon tomorrow under cloudy skies much of the day and a high of 67. Currently 56 at O'Hare. Next news at 8 and breaking news as it happens. Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560 The Answer.
This hourly segment is brought to you by HealthQuest Radio with Dr. David Kobaba. Every Saturday morning at 11, right here on AM 560, The Answer.
Only the biggest stories, only the biggest guests, and only the biggest opinions. This is AM 560, The Answer.
Lies, damn lies, and coronavirus models, to paraphrase. Paraphrase Mark Twain, that is. This model that was produced by Nicholas Kristof at the New York Times in conjunction with a couple of epidemiologists, this about a week ago, a little bit more than a week ago, actually. Particularly egregious, say, two Carnegie Mellon academics. One is an associate professor of mathematics. The other, his wife, is an assistant professor of molecular biology at the University of Pittsburgh. He's at Carnegie Mellon, she's at Pittsburgh. And they suggest that what Kristof's model shows, or doesn't show, actually, they suggest that what it doesn't show is more important than what it shows. They suggest that social distancing will work until it doesn't. In other words, as soon as you go back to the way we were before social distancing / isolation, you're going to see a second wave of infections. You're not flattening the curve. You're just hiding the number of infections. You're backloading them, which is why Nicholas Kristof's piece in the New York Times is disingenuous, because it stops 2 months out. It was constructed mainly to argue against Trump's aspirational date of starting to reopen the economy as of Easter. But what the two write, if the future is the same as the present, you're still going to have an epidemic that's just as bad. I was very upset that somebody was misleading people in this way about what the point of these mitigations are. I think it's dangerous to do that. The mitigations aren't to eliminate the caseload ultimately if you reopen. They're to buy time for a antiviral therapy, or better yet, a vaccine that could actually be used. You see? And it's important to understand the difference, control expectations about what can be accomplished with what measure taken. The idea that normal life can resume in 2 or 3 months without having a huge wave of infections, there's just no science behind that, says Wesley Pegden, the math professor from Carnegie Mellon. Their research concludes the models claiming social distancing will flatten the curve in as little as 2 months are flawed. In fact, they predict without additional interventions, including additional ventilators as well as a vaccine, the pandemic will return with a vengeance the moment society resumes normal activity, regardless of how long a lockdown lasts. The duration of the containment efforts does not matter if transmission rates return to normal when they end and mortality rates have not improved. This is simply because as long as a large majority of the population remains uninfected, lifting containment measures will lead to an epidemic almost as large as would happen without having mitigations in place at all. Now, there's still assumptions they're making, right? There's qualifiers. Right. If this, then that. If this, then that. And it's important to note those because there's some suggestion that mortality rates won't remain the same. And there's some suggestion that the number of individuals already infected and asymptomatic is substantial in the American populace writ large, which is why the antibody testing that's been discussed seems to me as so important to scale as quickly as possible. And Admiral Guar yesterday at the task force briefing said he believes it to be scalable by month's end, which is not inconsistent with Dr. Bhattacharya from Hoover Institution, who's starting. He was supposedly, according to him, starting a serological trial in Santa Clara this week, and was hoping, depending on funding, to scale that nationally by month's end as well. All right, that's a lot there. So rather than just me prattling on as a layman, just trying to decipher the experts, let's talk to an expert. He is Dr. Tommy Soares, Assistant Director of the Purdue Institute of Inflammation, Immunology, and Infectious Disease. Dr. Soares, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me on your show.
All right, so tell me from what you just heard, and in the context of all the discussions about models and projections and what we should be doing that we're not doing and how fast we should do what that I said makes sense and what that I said doesn't make sense.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's a really complicated issue, and modelers definitely have their hands full. I'm not a modeler myself, but I work with several of them at Purdue University. And here's the thing is that we've shown time and time again that lockdowns keep infections at bay. And they can really help us as we've seen time again that, and as you were mentioning, that there's this secondary wave of infection that could potentially come back if we don't make sure that there is enough stop or enough stoppage of spreading of this particular virus. The models are not perfect, and they definitely would be improved with higher levels of testing and tracing contacts of those who are infected. And, much of the information about how COVID-19 spreads through the population is unknown, and it must be estimated or assumed by modelers, as you were saying. There are several assumptions that need to take place in order to perfect those models, to build them in high fidelity to reality. What we're asking modelers to do is give us a crystal ball,
right.
And really they're trying to, as perfectly as they can, mimic what would really happen in real life. And how true these models are will only be known maybe months or years later when all the data has been known and collected. What I think is important to note is what you were saying is to understand how many of the people in the population are potentially carrying immunological antibodies that are protective. What we don't know yet is if somebody who was infected once, could they get infected again? We don't know if those that were infected once and survived are now immune or not. And as you said, it would be important to know because some of these people, if they are immune, they could return back to work and help us bridge this crisis that we're going through, especially on the economy side.
Yeah. Well, what are you and other researchers at Purdue focusing on right now?
Wow, I got to tell you, Purdue has amazed me by the way that they've pivoted and they've responded in a lot of different ways, many different directions. So what we're trying to do, particularly in the Purdue Institute of Inflammation, Immunology, and Infectious Disease, is create a research task force that can help to centralize knowledge and inventory and reagents and who's doing what, who has what resource, because as you probably know, a lot of the university has been shut down, and so there's only few resources that are left available, and those that are critical for COVID-19 research have been left, have been given permission to continue. So we're making a lot of these rapid diagnostic tests, and what we're trying to do are create these low-cost diagnostics that can be deployed to people's homes, and they can figure out if they have the infection or not before they leave their house and spread it to other people. And I think, as was mentioned before, the virus goes hidden for several days without eliciting an immune response. And so people can be spreading it around without knowing that they're actually carrying the virus. And that's important for us to try to figure out, because if we can avoid people leaving their homes knowing that they're infected, then we can avoid the spread in public places, or at least minimize it.
The other thing I saw happening at Purdue that was interesting, just as something that could be replicated elsewhere potentially, is this Safe Campus Task Force that the University President Mitch Daniels initiated to come to talk to people like you about best practices for what campus life should be like when it does return to something approximating normal.
the fall, hopefully.
In the post-COVID-19 period, or in preparation perhaps for the possibility of a second wave, what that college campus experience should look like, and maybe if Purdue gets it right, then other universities can follow suit.
Absolutely. I think that's a great comment, and something important to point out. The director of the Purdue Institute of Inflammation, Immunology, and Infectious Disease is Dr. Richard Kuhn. He's a world expert on viruses of these types, similar viruses, and he's been appointed as part of this task force. So President Mitch Daniels has assembled a multidisciplinary team that is going to help us create a safer campus to come. You know, the scary thing is the second wave potential of COVID-19, but also what if we're still dealing with some of these infections and flu season comes around and people are starting to be co-infected, and that's essentially a big risk for the population, not only of students at the universities, but professors, the staff, the workers, employees of the university that keep that whole thing going. So I think it's a great initiative, and it's an important initiative for us to keep public institutions like this safe, a safer environment for us to continue to learn without being exposed or trying to diminish the risk of exposure, so that we can be trendsetters and show what it should look like in a way that we can diminish the risk.
Going back to the research that you and your colleagues are doing in these various areas that have been launched since this outbreak, what about in the area of antiviral therapies? There's real disagreement among medical professionals about the prospects of HCQ as a effective treatment, as having a real material impact on helping people overcome infection with COVID-19. There's questions about remdesivir that's in clinical trials too, apparently, convalescent blood therapy. Where are you and your team in all of this?
So there are really two types of antivirals that we're focusing on at Purdue. And you're right. I mean, there's a lot of questions around other drugs that have already been approved by the FDA to see if we can repurpose them to try to help mitigate the risk of illness from this virus. But these are not necessarily stopping the virus from attacking. They're not necessarily formulated or have been tested in particular to look at how they could help with COVID-19. Those clinical trials still need to take place so that we can have the real evidence. So far, there's anecdotal type of talk about these things working, and because we have such a great need to find something that will work, I think as humans, we're willing much more to take these risks at these times of crises. But it's important to know that we really need a blind and randomized controlled trial to know that the data is valid and that the data can really be used to hang our hat on and use it. The antivirals that are being worked on at Purdue are two types. One is to prevent the virus from coming in and infecting a cell, so you're blocking its entry into the cell that it's trying to infect. And so we can do that with particular molecules that bind to the virus and prevent its entry. And then there's also a lot of work going on at Purdue that looks to prevent the virus from replicating or slow down the virus from making more of itself. In essence, the virus comes and hijacks the cell that it infects. It uses all the machinery that the cell has to make more of itself. And it says, oh, you were doing something else, now you're going to make more viruses. And if we can slow down that process of it hijacking the cell to make more of itself, we would allow then the immune system to kind of take effect and help ameliorate the virus condition and fight it and eliminate it eventually.
All right, I'm going to need those therapeutics on my desk by Friday at close of business. All right, Dr. Tommy Soares, Assistant Director of the Purdue Institute of Inflammation, Immunology, and Infectious Disease. Dr. Soares, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the invitation.
Thanks. We'll have you back. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
If you're talking about it, Dan and Amy are talking about it. It's Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Is this your situation? Cellular or data services are bad inside your building or vehicle? People notice. People complain. This is Kelly Piles. My company is PC Net Services. We can fix that annoying problem. Resolving this is not as complicated or as expensive as you might think, but it does make a difference. I have worked with the largest cellular providers in the nation. We could approve your cellular and data signal inside your building with all major carriers. No more dropped calls, no more complaints. First responders, government agencies, and business owners have used us to get a better signal inside their building. We can do the same for you. PCNet